Thursday reading session. We are reading Every Last Girl by Safina Hussain. And I just want to share that I've been seeing a lot of posts about Safina Hussain on LinkedIn recently, announcing that she had received the Magsaysay Award, but nobody really knows about this book. So I put in a word today in the post, in one of the LinkedIn posts, which talked about her Magsaysay Award. And I said that you need to read the book to know what it took for her to get the Magsaysay Award. So wonderful to have you all here again. And let's continue with our reading session. We have to start from asking the right questions. This approach was followed for 2 whole enrollment seasons, 2 whole years of work. From the end of the school exams in March through to July each year, we went to the allocated schools, met the head teachers, and took their list of girls. But we were starting to see a pattern emerge. One afternoon, I was tempted to ask for another cup of chai, but it was already 11, and we hadn't even really started what we had come to do. If we carried on much past noon, the May sun would start to dry the sweat and burn the skin. As we started to make our way around the village, on just an initial glance up the winding road that dissects the village, I could see a number of girls crouched on their doorsteps, their dupattas wrapped around them, their ghagras hitched up to stop them from getting in the way of their work, washing lentils or chopping onions. We continued around the village, following the list, chatting with parents, and gathering a small following of characters from the village who seemed keen to help. We had pretty much exhausted the list and met the parents of most of the girls recorded, but it seemed there might be more. You might find some other girls down by the water, one of the taggers along mentioned, pointing across the field that fell down to a slight trickle of water, an apology for a stream. Even the stream was thirsty for the monsoon. 5 more girls were indeed across the field, scrubbing clothes, and another couple were at the water pump, filling steel vessels that blinded us as they reflected the baking sun at the peak of its elevation. They were not on the list, but were visible if you looked hard enough. We started to realize that there were a lot of girls who were not on our list for one reason or another. We needed to understand why. Who were these girls and what made them invisible? Our first realization was that if a girl lived outside the school catchment, she wouldn't be on the list. Girls in the hamlets outside of the catchment didn't count. It appeared that the lists of out-of-school girls were following a system, following rules rather than following the girls. There were clear boundaries demarcated by local government and catchment areas that did not in any way flex to incorporate any additional girls. The houses across the valley, the areas that fell between villages, those on the margins that I have described to you before, often fell between school catchments. It was like a kind of no man's land. We were back to those physical margins again. If you live near the crossroads, you're going to be okay. But if you live on the margins, the world is going to forget about you. I can hear Hans Rosling again. And we were seeing this with our own eyes. We then started to realize that there were girls, no matter where they lived, who were also not on the list as they simply did not exist in the eyes of the authorities. In 2005, only 40% of childbirths in India took place in a health facility. And in rural communities, only 28% of children were not delivered at home. Parents' education and wealth is a strong determining factor in whether or not they give birth at home or in a medical institution. If you are poor and have not had the benefit of education, you are far more likely to have your baby without the help of a medical practitioner. Many of the girls we met were born at home. And this is not necessarily always a problem, except it is a leading cause of high maternal mortality and can lead to births not being recorded. Without a birth certificate, girls can easily disappear. Time and time again, we met families who had not been approached by the school or the district education officer, as their girls truly were invisible to the system. Their births had never been recorded. So, how would the authorities know they existed? How could they ever be counted? And then there were the Bahue, the daughters in law, the child brides. When we came to Aarti's house, we learnt another important lesson. Aarti was 7 years old, and we had enrolled her back in 2009. We returned in June that same year to check if she was all ready for school as the start of the school year was just around the corner. Aarti's parents had taken a bit of convincing, but her two older brothers had completed their 10th, and so they did believe in education. Aarti used to help a lot around the house so that her mother could work. But with no younger siblings in the end, Aarti's mother decided she would now go to school and the housework would still get done somehow. On our second visit, however, we noticed another girl in the back room of their home. She didn't look up when we entered and was not introduced to us by Aarti's parents. This little girl was veiled. She must have been about 12 or 13 and was busy rolling out dough into round chapatis on a small wooden plinth by the fire. We glanced down again at our list of girls, a little confused, but the list clearly said that Aarti was the only girl in the house. We felt a little awkward, but eventually inquired as to who was making the meal in the next room. That's Sheetal, our daughter-in-law, Aarti's mother explained in a nonchalant tone. On our first visit to Aarti's house back in April, we had asked about the family following our usual questionnaire. The sons were over 18, so we hadn't dwelled on them. We learned that Aarti's father Jagdish was a laborer with a local construction firm, and Aarti's mother Meenu worked through the Megrega. We had asked about the children in the house, and Meenu had mentioned all three of her children. And then, of course, Aarti became our focus as she was at that time not ready to school, not going to school, and had missed the reception year. We had gotten our answers. We made our enrollment plan, but had we asked the right questions? What we hadn't asked was, are there any other girls in the house? We hadn't inquired if Meenu and Jagdish's sons were married. A daughter-in-law, a Bahu, was not part of our inquiry. Sheetal was invisible, out of school, not on anyone's list. And this was not a rare occurrence. In 2024, India still accounted for 1 in 3 of the world's child brides. An estimated 1.5 million girls got married each year before the age of 18. And given that the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act only came into law in 2006, when we first started work, we came across the situation many, many times. 58% of young women in Rajasthan aged between 18 and 29 years said they had married before they were 18 when interviewed by the National Family Health Survey in 2005-6. Being a bride meant in so many eyes that you were no longer a child. You no longer counted as a girl. When the lists don't work, in this very first pilot program, we found 885 girls who had either never been enrolled in school or had been forced to drop out. 885 girls on the margins, invisible to the authorities. Some born at home, some brides, no longer children, all missing from lists. This was twice the number provided by the schools. In most villages, we were finding close to double the amount of girls mentioned in the school's list. The numbers all had names. We had exercise books with names and numbers. We then had Excel spreadsheets that eased the quantification back in the office when Vikram managed to get to our one and only computer. But every number was a girl. Every girl had a story, and every girl had to go to school. After 2 years, we managed to enroll just over half the outer school girls in our 2 pilot blocks. Then, just 2 years later, after our 500 school pilot, we had honed our program, and outer school girls figure reduced to a mere 1% of the female school going population. Only 1 in 100 girls in our districts in 2009 was now not going to school. This was deemed a great success, but I didn't feel that success. The voice inside me was a worried voice. This isn't enough. What if I haven't done a good enough job? That 1% was still 279 little girls. This was a recurring niggling feeling whenever I reviewed our list. The marks on the page would start to swim in front of my eyes. And whenever I saw a name, I saw a face. The numbers stayed on the page, but the girls entered my head. I saw Vibha on the back of her brother's bike. I saw Sheetal in a dark corner of her in-laws' hut, slaving over a hot stove, her husky voice telling a story of dangerous smoke fumes without the need for words. And I saw myself in some of my darkest days when I too was out of school. And there was my hypervigilance rearing its face. What if there are more? What if there are more girls? What if we miss one girl? It seemed quite clear to us all that this wasn't a robust enough system. The lists weren't foolproof. A census for girls. By 2010, with a few years' experience and a deeper understanding of the missing data, I decided to suggest a dramatically different approach. Rather than working backwards from the school's lists of out-of-school girls, I felt we had no choice but to take on a full village survey ourselves, a comprehensive census for girls. Are you mad? The team exclaimed. You want to knock on every door? As recommended by the UN, all countries must conduct a decennial survey. To date in India, the government has knocked on every door of its vast population 16 times. The very first census was published in 1872, and the 2021 census, delayed because of COVID, is still much awaited. But it is a huge endeavor, requiring enormous manpower and massive costs. The team thought that this was a crazy suggestion, an impossible task. We are not the government, they announced, hoping to draw a line under the idea. But I genuinely felt we had no choice. By 2010, the 2001 2 census was becoming very outdated. The school's data was inaccurate. During the 500 school program, we had to deliver detailed reports to the government as part of our agreement to work alongside the public schools. So, in order to demonstrate the need for a better list of outer school children, we undertook a full door to door survey in 4 villages, giving us the ability to compare the government list with ours. There was resistance and criticism at first. But once the government spot checked our data through a significant village level sample audit, they agreed. Our figures were 98% accurate. Our out of school girl numbers were a lot more accurate than theirs, and depressingly, a lot bigger. The picture we were painting was dismal, but the need for our own new census for girls was clearly established. Importantly, the government agreed, and our Educate Girls team, although daunted by the plan, also eventually backed me up. Mapping their world. 80% of Indian addresses are written with respect to a landmark which typically lies between 50 and 1,500 meters from the actual location of the home. And the area covered by a pin code can be anything from 1.5 and 179 square kilometers, an area that could conceivably hold close to 100,000 households. This wasn't going to be an easy job, but I was tenacious. And luckily for me, the team was too. First, we have to map the village, Vikram explained quietly but firmly. If we were going to do this, we had to do it properly, systematically. As I threw about wild ideas of a census, Vikram was the member of the team who took the lead and channeled my vision and honed it into what was to become our all important village entry strategy that is today still guiding us as we enter entirely new states, not just districts. Without a robust address system, we needed to create our own, and for that, we needed a village meeting. The East India Company's Survey of India produced the very first professional map of the country, published finally in 1779 after around 13 years of work. And today, we have Survey of India maps and, of course, Google. But we needed a very different type of map. Nothing historical, nothing so slow. We needed a real time map. We called a group of elders in this first village who sat for a day with a huge piece of chart paper and colored pens. The way we began was by agreeing upon the margins of the village, not an easy feat, but we needed to identify the furthest first. The map was, of course, not to scale. But once the boundary was set, we worked inwards with deep discussion and contributions from everyone identifying every important chota mota little landmark and every home and numbering them. We ignored the government school catchment. Anil Bhai's house is over there by the temple, one of the team members offered up. Yes, and there are at least 3 other homes that side, one of the older men agreed. And do we know if there are any girls there? We inquired. No one was sure, but we would go and find out. The chart paper was a web of lanes, numbers, and Devanagari script by the time we finished it. And the job the next day was to start at home number one and then go and knock on every single door, going the last mile. This was our very first door to door survey, something that is now the backbone of our organization. That day, when we conducted our questionnaire, for the first time, I was sure there was no way I thought in my wildest dreams that we would top 14 million household visits nearly 2 decades later. The questionnaire had been designed by Vikram. We had very different styles, Vikram and he was perhaps a little surprised that I insisted on testing the survey myself. He had thought deeply about each question in the tool, and it was our job that day to test how well the questions worked with the village interviewees and the breadth of team members engaged in the asking. Vikram's assumption was that we should follow the map and diligently go from house to house. And he was right. But knowing that he would follow the system, I had a far more reactive approach and found myself almost immediately attracting a crowd. Bahar se aaye hain. They're outsiders, the cry went out. And I was immediately surrounded. Mumbai se hai was the first question. Or was it actually a statement? A knowing declaration that didn't really require an answer? You are from Mumbai? Was it my accent, my dress? Whatever it was, it attracted attention. Vikram, on the other hand, looked and sounded right. He combined the traditional with the new in his tanned curled to curled toe juti slippers, his denim jeans, and an immaculately pressed pistachio kurta. He was the local. He was our license to operate. As we started to move around the village from house to house, what started as one or two children following me barefooted and curious turned into quite a crowd, with a handful of youth from the village offering their support, causing what Vikram could only describe as drama and a distraction. He was not amused. I could do this in half the time if I was on my own, he declared. But secretly, I think he was moved by the children's engagement in our mission. Vikram was wise. He still is. We were contemporaries, but I always deferred to him, given his deep understanding. uh, given his deep understanding of Pali. He was born and raised there. And if anyone could design effective strategies to challenge persistent discriminatory social norms, it was Vikram, because he understood context. He had lived and breathed these villages and communities his whole life. There are no children in that house, Didi, the children cried. They knew everything. Here they don't go to school. Here they are bahut garib, too poor, and their children never come to school. A matter of fact statement. The children confidently assessed the village door to door, street to street, and shared their expert knowledge. This was the intelligence we needed, being crowdsourced by a group of hopping and skipping youngsters, and some of the older ones applied later on to work with us. But Vikram was right. We still needed to complete the survey and follow the meticulously designed system. We couldn't miss anyone. I was a distraction, but I was loving it. And what we ended up doing worked. While Vikram worked with the tools and the process, I was building relationships and trust, listening and seeking out our natural leaders. This was a winning combination for effective community mobilization. We had to have the perfect balance between data collection and relationship collection. Ah, what a beautiful sentence. The door to door survey gave us both. But counting girls wasn't as straightforward as just following a map. Not only did we have to go to the extreme margins of the villages, ask the right questions about daughters and daughters in law, and navigate the complexity of birth certification and age proof, we also had to work with things like joint families. Knocking on one door did not necessarily mean we would find one family. Within the confines of a boundary wall, we might find multiple family units living together, but often very much socially apart. One family would only answer for their nuclear family, and we missed many girls by not speaking with every family member. In a joint family, very often each mother had her own cooking pots and fire. We improved our system by counting not just a home, but each stove and mother. And we linked our count to every stove in the household, not just the actual physical home. So, our intricate numbering system that we painted on the walls included a count for every mother in the home. We were determined to leave nothing to chance. Over the river, the system was like a machine. We have an average run rate of about 40 houses a day, Vikram explained in a very business-like manner. Or perhaps that was my terminology he was repeating back to me, as I had flashbacks from my economics degree days. We were a few months on, and Vikram was talking with deep experience of a successful household survey that we were now rolling out at the beginning of the next school year, as we expanded our outreach to new districts. When the girls were in school or there were no children in the household, the door-to-door survey was pretty quick. We could indeed cover around 40 houses in a day. On other days, it might take half a day to reach just one home. Today was one of those days. While I had been to one village and surveyed around 30 houses, Sanjay and Swati had crossed a river to find just one. They looked exhausted. There was one last house, and we thought one last girl. We hadn't been there yet. Sanjay had announced at lunchtime. The map had been created in a highly consultative manner, and Sanjay, with the help of the Panchayat Raj and a couple of other village members, had worked hard to ensure that we covered the full village, every hamlet across the fields that only just counted as the village. Sanjay, who we had not hired at first, was now one of our most tenacious colleagues. He was a short but robust young man of 22 who had grown up in the terrain, a terrain that tested your physicality and obviously shaped your form. He was strong and had a face that shared wisdom and resilience beyond his years. And this was a very hilly village. In any normal school, a more urban school perhaps, Sanjay would likely be an athlete, but his fitness was born of work. His strength came from the geography. Today, he almost looked like an athlete, sporting a crimson colored polo shirt. We were having our end of day debrief, and Sanjay insisted on taking us down to the edge of the river. I was exhausted, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He had a story to tell. So we followed him out past what was the last house we had surveyed and down the side of the hill behind which the sun was starting to hide itself. There, he pointed. That's the house. There was a vast body of water that stood between us, and what Sanjay insisted was a dwelling. My eyes were starting to fail me, and I had to take his word for it. The river was really about a kilometer from where you would assume the village ended. But no, It continued across the river and up the opposite bank. As our mapping process insisted, every family had to be part of some village. Everyone needed to belong, but this was far. If I really squinted, I could just about make out a tiny cluster of huts halfway up what was the dusty, dry hillside that rose out of the water and would be transformed and green when the monsoons came, as too would the river. It looked wider than a river. It was more like a lake, but scanning left and then right, there was no end to it. So it must be flowing to and from somewhere. The surface was a khaki green, the color of a military uniform, and it appeared like the water halted at a very steep ashen rock face rather than an accessible bank. I could not even imagine how they had crossed the river, let alone landed on the other side. At that moment, we took it all in. It was quite still, like a mirror, and the reflection of the hillside, inverted, stretched back towards us. Once the rains come, Sanjay said in a warning tone, the river gains a new life. Currently, it stands still. Anytime soon, it will lap up the monsoon and start to really flow. Sanjay continued with his day's story. There wasn't a boat, but a local farmer who also had a tiny strip of land on the other side of the river where he grew gourds had agreed to ferry them across. He had tied three large bamboo logs together, and instead of a paddle, he used a stick with a plastic lid attached to it with twine. We were obviously going to get wet, but we had to go, he recalled. The farmer usually traversed the water alone, so it was a push for the three of them to board his raft, and at one point, Sanjay and Swati took off their shoes and used them to paddle furiously to try and halt what felt like a slow submersion. But there was a steely determination to leave no girl behind. They reached, but then had the hillside to scale before they could complete the task, ask the questions, and add Pinky to their list. Pinky had never been to school. Sanjay continued, not sounding surprised. But his voice was full of empathy and some personal pride. Writing on the wall. As they departed, Sanjay left our signature on the wall of Pinky's home, our Educate Girls logo, and a unique number whose meaning was known only to us. Odd, you might think, but let me explain. My vigilance extended to my obsession with data verification and attribution, and we had insisted on a system where we could send in auditors to cross verify our survey, ensuring that our data was correct and that our teams were following the right process. To enable this to happen, we painted our beautiful logo with sweeping blue strokes at the entrance to every house. Our logo, I like to say she, was a simple line drawing of a girl's head with two pigtails and two little bows. The logo was smartly designed as the girl was made by drawing E and G, which stood for our organization's name. It was such a win to have a simple logo. It helped us become part of the community. The logo was also highly democratic. People could draw it easily. They felt it was theirs. It did not feel alien. We had no institutional language. We were plain and simple. Educate girls. Given the lack of an address system, we created our own, and each household was given a unique number recorded on our map and in our list. A little girl had and a number to help everyone know that we had been there and we had counted. That way, when we returned to either cross check or work on our enrollment campaign, we knew where to look. And what better way to instill the importance of our girls than by having a little girl symbol adorn every household, no matter whether they had a girl or not. This was an educate girls village, an educate girls hamlet, and a community that was slowly beginning to believe in its girls. And even today, as you drive through the districts where we have worked, you will be able to work out the educate girls' villages from the wall paintings. Sanjay's narration of his afternoon was truly inspiring. And it really hit home to me that we were finding young people who fully embraced our mission of finding the very, very last girl and were dedicated to following such a thorough and rigorous process. In the time Vikram and I had covered 30 homes, Sanjay and Swati had only found Pinky, but that was still a triumph. There was still work to do to persuade her family to take her to school, but they had found another precious little girl. Pinky, she had a name. She was no longer a potential or a house number on a list. She was a little girl we now knew. My mouth stretched into a wide smile of praise and celebration as I caught Sanjay's seeking eye. He had every right to be proud of such effort and tenacity. And this is what we sought time and time again. In our first 5 years, we learnt a huge amount and grew our work significantly across our first two districts of Pali and Jalore. By 2012, we were working in around 4,000 schools and conducting a huge enrollment campaign on an annual basis. Thousands of village meetings, doorstep conversations, and hours in the classrooms. We now had a model that we knew worked. We had a rigorous system and processes for finding and recording out of school girls. We had an incredible team of local volunteers with deep community knowledge and engagement, and an authentic way of connecting through personal stories and stories of change, through empathy and experience. And all this shared in order to change the mindsets of families who had previously been rigid and inflexible in their attitudes and behavior towards their girls. Yes, Sandeep, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is fantastic. We should put a bookmark here.
Absolutely.
And today I realized that the logos I had seen on the walls were actually Educate Girls.
Just
I've
imagine.
been to
And
the
yes,
same district. I had no idea
absolutely.
of this particular logo. I saw it in so many households in Pali
Right.
in my area. I used to think it's a
Imagine.
government enumeration counting girls in the homes.